adoration was as critical to the old Egyptians for what it's worth to us today, and in spite of the fact that marriage in Old Egypt was focused on cultural security and individual progression, love was a famous subject in verse, particularly in the period of the New Realm, 1570 to 1069 BC.M. With the coming of works commending the excellencies of a sweetheart, or spouse, the cherished Beatty I papyrus traces all the way back to 1200 BC. Among them, we find a piece of writing in which one of the men discusses his sister, who is truly not his natural family member, as ladies were generally alluded to as the sisters of men. More established ladies are their moms, men of a similar age are their sisters, more seasoned men are their dads. The man in the passage of the papyrus, cherished Beatty, acclaims his darling, however. My sister is exceptional, nobody can rival her, she is the most gorgeous lady on the planet. See, it resembles the star of Yemeni verse, which denotes the start of a decent year. She transmits flawlessness and shines with well-being. Her eye look is perfect. Her lips talk a couple of lovely words. She is for quite some time necked, her chest is stout, her hair is of unadulterated lapis lazuli tone, even gold doesn't contrast in her arms, and her fingers resemble lotus blossoms. Her posterior are full, however her abdomen is tight, and her thighs just make her more gorgeous. Lewis 203. Ladies in Old Egypt were given practically equivalent status with men, in accordance with an old story that after the beginning of creation, when Osiris and Isis controlled the world, Isis made the genders equivalent in power. In any case, guys were viewed as the prevailing sex, and recorders composed that writing was overwhelmingly male, which impacted how ladies were seen. Lord Tutankhamun was viewed as the most popular ruler of the advanced state in Egypt, not on account of his extraordinary accomplishments, but rather as a result of his burial place, which was seen as complete and unblemished in 1922, regardless of the youthful period of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, 1336 to 1327 BC.M, when he climbed the lofty position. He gave his all to re-establish security and return the old Egyptian strict practices after the rule of his dad, Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 BC.M, assisted by his young spouse and stepsister with Queen Enki-Zinemonius, around 1350 BC.M, and their photographs together are among the most fascinating pictures of affection and sentiment in Old Egypt. The sovereign, Enki-Zinemonius, has forever been shot with her better half, yet this is average, since such pictures are normal. Yet what makes ruler Tut and his significant other particularly fascinating is the way the craftsman accentuates their dedication to one another by their closeness, tokens of their hands and looks. Egyptologist Zahi Hawass says, "They adored each other. This is absolutely our decision on the creative pictures that fill the burial chamber of the brilliant lord, and we can feel the adoration between them when we see the sovereign remaining before her better half, offering him blossoms and going with him during his hunting trips," he said. 51. Tutankhamun passed on at 18 years old, and sovereign Enki-Zinemonius vanished after him from verifiable records, and in spite of the fact that their portrayal was glorified, as in most Egyptian craftsmanship, they actually convey a profound degree of truthfulness that one likewise finds, to changing degrees, in different canvases and engravings over the course of Egypt. A spouse said about his better half in an engraving on a casket from the 21st tradition, "Gracious misfortune, you were captured from me, your lovely face, nobody was like you and I didn't see a problem with you." A husband said about his significant other in an engraving on a final resting place from the 21st line. The old Egyptians saw people in numerous comparative engravings as equivalent accomplices and companions in a relationship, and albeit the man was the top of the family, and was supposed to comply, ladies were regarded as co-workers with their spouses, not subordinate to him. Egyptologist Erica Foyt composed, "The spouse was portrayed in the improvements of her better half's grave, as an equivalent, a member in his life on earth as well as in the other world." Furthermore, in addition to the fact that she needed to conceal her body during any period of Egyptian history, however, her appeal was featured in frescoes and bas-reliefs. Nardo, 29. Eusexuality in antiquated Egypt is simply one more part of life on the planet, There were no denials in regards to sex and no shame related with any part of it aside from treachery, inbreeding among the lower classes, and in the two cases, this disgrace was more perilous for ladies than men on the grounds that the chain of plunge was sent through ladies. History specialist John E. Lewis notes, albeit the old Egyptians had a delicate mentality towards consensual grown-up sex, there was no exceptional shame against ill-conceived kids, yet when a lady wedded, she was supposed to be dedicated to her significant other. To be certain that the offspring of their marriage, the main successors to his property, are his posterity, and there is no authority discipline against a lady who engages in sexual relations beyond marriage. Unique disciplines were separation, beatings, and in some cases demise. 204. While this is valid, there are records of government authorities mediating in those cases and requesting the execution of a person for infidelity when the spouse revealed the case to the specialists, and in one case, the lady was attached to a stake outside her home, where she was condemned to be licentious and consumed to death. Old Egyptians and orientation. Stories and alerts about untrustworthy ladies show up as often as possible in old Egyptian writing. One of the most popular is the story of the two siblings, otherwise called the destiny of the untrustworthy spouse, which recounts the tale of Ambu and his sibling Bada. Ambu, the senior sibling, lives with his better half and more youthful sibling, Bada, and at some point Bada gets back from the field to take more seeds for planting, so his sister by marriage attempts to allure him. Bada abstains, saying that he won't let anybody know what occurred, and gets back to the fields with his sibling, and when Ambu gets back later, he tracks down his significant other. Lying there, maybe she was exposed to brutality by a detestable entertainer, and she guarantees that Bada attempted to assault her, which drove Ambu to betray his sibling. This story was composed around 1200 BC.M, which is a potential motivation for the later scriptural story in the Book of Beginning 39:7, about Joseph and Zuleika, the spouse of Potiphar, the deer of Egypt. In the story, Ambu and Bada, the relationship of the siblings was obliterated, the spouse was killed, yet before she kicked the bucket, she kept on bringing on some issues for the siblings, and later in the public eye. The focal point of the Egyptians' unfriendly solidness and amicability would have made this subject very applicable for the general population. The fantasy of Isis and Osiris, and the passing of Osiris, because of his sibling, Set, is perhaps of the most popular legend connected with the divine beings, where Set chooses in the most far-reaching rendition of that legend to kill Osiris, later, Nephthys, spouse of Set, masked as Isis, to lure Osiris. Turmoil ruled after the homicide of Osiris, as a result of treachery, which had serious areas of strength for and on the old public. Osiris is viewed as honest in the legend, where he envisions that he was having intercourse with his better half, and, as in different stories, the other lady, or the weird lady, Nephthys, is at fault. Not much was expounded on sex in Old Egypt. There is almost no data about sexual circumstances and practices, dissimilar to stories that empower constancy, which researchers generally make sense of as the absence vital of this point among the Egyptians, and there is additionally no solution for homosexuality, despite the fact that analysts trust that the extensive Lord BB 2, 2278–2184 BC.M. He was gay, and there was opportunity for unmarried ladies to have intercourse with whomever they picked, and the Ebers Clinical Papyrus, composed around 1542 BC.M, preventative remedies. It peruses in the papyrus. A prophylactic solution for a time of a few years. Grind until how much acacia dates mellow with just the right amount of honey, then saturate a piece of fleece with the combination, and afterward embed it into the vagina. Lewis 112. Early terminations were likewise accessible, and there was no shame related with them. For example, early sex. Truth be told, there is no word for virgin in the Old Egyptian language, which recommends that the level of one's sexual experience or scarcity in that department is of significance, and prostitution was likewise not a worry, as Egyptologist Stephen Snape noticed that proof for prostitution in Old Egypt is fairly sparse, particularly before the late time. 116. No massage parlors were referenced in Egypt, and prostitution was not referenced in any composed works or legitimate choices. The renowned papyrus, Turin Sex 55001, portraying different suggestive experiences, is still distant from a definitive clarification with respect to whether it depicts sexual relations between a whore and a client, or is it simply a comic, and significantly more hazardous than a whore or a physically unpracticed lady is that one who can lure a man and drive him away from his better half and family. The astute Annie, in his charges, cautions of the bizarre lady, whom nobody knows in her city, doesn't view at her as a bystander and doesn't engage in sexual relations with her, and the shortfall of a lady from her significant other is profound water that has no bottom. He said. Lewis 184. It was coherent that the old Egyptians particularly centered around those accounts that empower internal quiet, since they understood the significance of social congruity, and it's a miracle that there are no comparable stories where men are to be faulted. The old Egyptians underscored the worth of non-polygamy even among the tales of the divine beings. The male divine beings normally had just a single spouse or buddy, yet the Lord was permitted to have whatever number wives as could reasonably be expected, and any man of the imperial family with potential was likewise permitted, and this most probably impacted how male disloyalty was seen, notwithstanding. The ideal relationship in Old Egyptian comprised of a couple staying devoted to one another and having kids. Marriage in ancient Egypt. There was no marriage ceremony in ancient Egypt, and a woman was preparing a wife for a man the moment she entered his house with her agreed luggage, and parents usually arranged marriages, from the agreed bride price and mutual gifts from the groom's family to the bride. Prenuptial agreements were common, and any material property that the bride brings for marriage remains her property, which she disposes of at will. The purpose of marriage was to have children, but couples were expected to love and honor each other. Egyptologist Barbara Watterson comments on this. It seems that taking a wife was synonymous with creating a home. A man was expected to love his wife, as the following commandment of the sage Tahatep explains. Love your wife, feed her, clothe her, make her happy, but do not make her the forehand. Another sage, Annie, gave a recipe for a happy life. Do not play the role of the boss with your wife, do not be cruel to her at home. If you realize her goodness, do not ask her where something is, if she has put it in the right place. 15. The groom and the bride's father prepare a marriage contract, which is signed in front of witnesses, after which the couple is considered married. The children are in the custody of the mother, and in case of divorce they go with her, and despite the many warnings from the unfaithful woman, the woman was given tremendous freedom in marriage. Historian Don Nardo wrote, women were nothing more than property in the eyes of most men in most ancient societies, and the focus in those societies was always on how a woman could or should make a man happy. Certainly, Egypt, like the ancient civilizations, was largely male-dominated, and women were mostly expected to carry out the orders of their husbands. However, many Egyptian couples seem to have enjoyed positive love relationships. 23. Tomb paintings and other art and inscriptions show husbands and wives eating, dancing, working together. In royal families, a brother could marry his sister or half-sister, but this was not encouraged among the rest of the population. For most people, marriage was arranged for the maximum benefit of both parties. It was hoped that, when they lived together, their love would grow for each other if they did not actually do it. Nardo writes, a man may find some measure of happiness even if he does not deeply love his wife. Knowing that she is satisfied, willingly keeps a tidy, well-managed house, teaches children good manners, and can also be proud of the fact that he worked hard to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. 23 to 24. A stable nuclear family was considered the foundation of a stable society, and although members of the royal family were free to marry anyone they chose, similar to the marriage of brother and sister gods such as Isis, Osiris, or Nut and Jab, it encouraged commoners to marry outside the kinship framework except in the case of cousins. He marries girls at the age of 12 and boys at the age of 15, with the average age appearing to be 14 for girls and 18 or 20 for boys. The boy by this time would have already learned his father's trade and become engaged in it, while the girl, unless she was from the royal family, would have been trained to manage the household and take care of the young and elderly in the family, and domestic animals. Historian Charles Freeman points out that the family was the living unit of Egyptian society. Frescoes and sculptures show satisfied couples putting their arms around each other. There was perfect care from the young to the old. Nardo, 25, however, such marriages did not always work out, and in such cases, divorce occurs. Divorce in ancient Egypt. The end of the marriage was as simple as the beginning, where one or both spouses filed for divorce. The material property is divided according to the prenuptial agreement, a new agreement is signed, and the marriage ends. Historian Margaret Ponson notes that the dissolution of a marriage requires a certain amount of openness regarding the property rights and economic survival of the ex-wife. 156. Margaret means by this that even those property that the husband may think is his must be divided with his wife according to the original agreement. Anything that the wife marries, she was allowed to take with her at the end of the marriage, except in case of marital infidelity, clearly proven. Then the woman is deprived of her rights upon divorce. These agreements became more complicated during the New Kingdom and the late era as divorce proceedings seemed to have become more codified and the central authority was more involved in the proceedings. Ponson notes how many documents of the late era look like real marriage contracts. In case of divorce, the dowry given by the groom at the time of marriage returns to the wife for her maintenance, or is paid to her in one lump sum. 156. Alimony payments were also an option, since the husband sends his ex-wife a monthly salary until she remarries, even if there are no children among them. Timeless marriage. It was normal, nonetheless, that the marriage would endure forever, even in the hereafter. Most men lived exclusively until their 30s. Ladies frequently kicked the bucket at 16 years old in labor and carried on with somewhat longer than men. And assuming one had a decent connection with his better half, the expectation of seeing her again would mellow the deficiency of death to some degree. As the burial place works of art and engravings portray the couple appreciating each other's conversation in the reed field, and doing likewise things that they did when they were on the planet. The Egyptian confidence in endlessness was a significant mainstay of marriage wherein one looks to make his life and the existence of others on earth as charming as conceivable so one can appreciate it for eternity. There was no heaven in the hereafter for the Egyptians, however an immediate continuation of the everyday routine that one experienced. Ponson composes, endlessness was timeless, no Egyptian fears it. One of the old names for it was no. Yet it was likewise called Shno. Importance round, thus timeless or perpetual, and turned into a model for imperial cartridges. 86. One stands after death before Osiris. To pass judgment assuming that he is equitable, he moves to the reed field, where one will find all that he abandoned on the planet, his home, his number one tree, his number one canine or feline, and those individuals who have previously died, including his better half. In any case, in the event that an individual doesn't treat his significant other or spouse well throughout everyday life, this gathering might in all likelihood never occur, and, surprisingly, more regrettable, one can track down self-experiencing both in this life and in the great beyond. We have numerous instances of engravings and spells to avert hardships and misfortune, the reason for which was accepted to be that the spouse or wife in the hereafter is spooky or vindicated on the other by underhanded spirits. In such cases, a man or a lady goes to the cleric and thinks of him a spell making sense of his side of the story and requests the spirit from the spouse or wife to stop what he is doing, and then again, in the event that an individual is now at fault for some wrongdoing, he should admit and make up for it somehow or another. The ministers endorsed any essential compensation, and when it was finished, the revile was lifted. The ostraka. Drones at different strict locales give proof of appreciation to a divine being or goddess for their mediation in such matters, or requesting their assistance in invalidating the vengeance of the spirit of a spouse or wife. One more method for settling such struggles is to eradicate every one of the recollections of an individual from presence, by obliterating any photographs they had. A well-known illustration of this is the patio of an authority from the 6th line named Kamek, who had all the proof of his significant other substance deleted from the walls. The spirit of an individual lives provided that it is recollected by those on the planet, landmarks, pillars, extraordinary sanctuaries, for example, Karnak and Thebes, are endeavors to guarantee the continuation of the memory, and when an individual's name and picture are lost, his spirit disappears, he will be unable to go on in the reed field, and they surely cannot bring any hardship on earth in light of the fact that the spirit should have the option to see an image of themselves or their names to return. Staying away from such issues by carrying on with an existence of consciousness of everlasting congruity, and being benevolent in regular daily existence was trusted. The analyst James F. Romano. The Egyptians cherished life and expected to sustain its most gorgeous viewpoints in the great beyond. Nardo, 20. A portion of these charming viewpoints were love, sex, and marriage, which one could appreciate perpetually as long as he capitalized on it while on the planet.